Now we're ready to switch things around. We're in the month of June. An economic assessment as to where we are as a country. Where are we? Where's government's plans? The government announced well over $50 billion budget. They're hoping to see some growth, 2.5% expected growth rate. Joining us on set this morning, Jerry Brooks, the Chief Operating Officer of the Anson McAl Group. Mr. Brooks, good morning. How are you?
Thank you very much, Hema. Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Now, we're looking at the first week of June. This is mid-year. If we had to do an assessment of the government, how would you describe the state of the economy today? Let's give the government a mid-year assessment.
Hema, if one takes a look at the economy, we have had 4 years of negative growth, 3.3%, 0%, 1.4% negative, and last year, 2012, we came in at 1.4%. What we're seeing is an improving economy, but there's still a downside risk. And we're also located in a region and indeed in an international environment in which has been very troubled and which has been extremely volatile.
Now, looking at troubled and volatile, the government has expressed confidence, 2.5% projected growth. Commentators are saying that's a little optimistic. Do you share that optimism?
I cautiously share the optimism. We all want to see it happen in Trinidad and Tobago. If you take a look at the U.S. today is growing at 2.4% Q1, down from their projected of 2.5%. In Trinidad and Tobago, there are several positive macroeconomic factors that we could look to. One is that we could look to the unemployment rate at 5.4%. Our exchange rate is holding steady at between 638 to 644 in that band. The Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange has grown Q1 by 8%. We have a number of companies which are delivering positive results: Anson McAl, Neil and Massey, Unilever, Scotia, Republic Bank. We've had 3 hydrocarbon fines, one from Petrotrin, Bayfield, and the largest, which is the BP TT find. Our budget deficit, which was projected at 7.7 billion, is actually going to come in at about 1.7 billion. And you're seeing some growth shoots in the construction sector, and that's beginning to power the manufacturing sector. So there are some positives. Our Heritage and Stabilization Fund is at $5 billion. We have 13 months of cover. So you have some reasonably good macroeconomic fundamentals, and that gives us some fiscal space at the country level to be able to move the country forward. There are, however, some challenges.
Now, before I ask my next question about the challenges, let's share with you a story from our newscast. This was earlier in the year. Let's look at what the government was hoping to achieve as we continue to assess where we are halfway through.
After several years of doom and gloom, the central bank says this country's economy is improving. The bank on Monday delivered its financial stability report for December 2012. Governor Joala Rambaran admits global economic problems remain a concern as it could affect local financial institutions.
It is quite clear that the volatile global environment, the sluggish domestic economy, and persistently low domestic interest rates have continued to pose risks to the performance and profitability of our local financial institutions.
But he says the local banking system remains profitable. He's also reporting that the balance sheets of the non-banking sector have contracted. Life insurance companies are performing in a satisfactory manner, and the asset quality of non-life insurance companies have improved. It's for all these reasons, he says, that the economic outlook for 2013 has not changed from 2012.
We are actually projecting here at the bank a growth rate of about 2.5% in 2013.
Director of Research at the Central Bank, Dr. Alvin Hilaire, points to improvements late last year.
The preliminary numbers show that we do have some growth of close to 1.5% in the third quarter, and this is encouraging because after several quarters of contraction of the energy sector, we do see some growth.
I am Chester Sambrano reporting for CNC3 News.
Now, before we looked at that package as to what the central bank expected for this year, we spoke about the challenges, Mr. Brooks. What are some of the challenges facing the economy? You've highlighted the pluses, but there must be some minuses.
There are several challenges. The first challenge is that we've got to grow our revenue line. And if one takes a look at the energy sector, you'd see that the energy sector, there are some areas in the energy sector that have not grown. Our fertilizer production and exports have not grown. Our methanol production and exports have not grown. The second challenge that we face is that we've got to improve governance and we've got to improve performance in our state sector. So that's the second challenge. And the third challenge is the age-old challenge of diversification. If one takes a look at countries which found themselves in the same peer group as ours, the Colombias, the Ecuadors, the Omans, the Qatars, etc., all of those companies, all of those countries, inclusive of Botswana, have returned to a plus 3% growth mean post-2009. We have not gotten back there. And one also needs to recognize that our growth at this stage is still extremely fragile. So there are a lot of things that we need to do, and you can break those challenges down into energy sector challenges, and you could break them into non-energy sector challenges. On the energy side, there's some deliberate things that we need to do, and we can talk about that.
Now, looking at what's happening in the economy, we understand that they're saying it's stable, but you've highlighted some countries that have been able to switch things around. Are we understanding the challenges? Are they the same challenges from a year ago, 2 years ago, 2009?
They aren't the same challenges from 2009. Post-2009, we faced a subprime crisis, and if you recall, at a regional level, we had the fall in tourism, we had the fall in remittance, and we also had a crisis in our financial services sector. We had CLICO, we had Madoff, to deal with, which was significant issues from an economic perspective. I think we have settled. We have been able to get CLICO to a large extent off the table. There's still some CLICO issues. The government has done a good job with CLICO in terms of the bond issue and as well in terms of the CIF, be located at on the stock exchange. But so that the challenges 5 years ago are very different from the challenges today. Today the challenges are, one, to diversify the economy. Two, to create conditions of sustainable growth, which means that you've got to drive revenue both on the energy side and on the non-energy side. And the third persistent challenge is the challenge of diversification, which brings with it the challenge of competitiveness and the challenge of productivity. Those are more pronounced today than they were 3 to 5 years ago.
Competitiveness and productivity. Now, almost a year ago, when the Minister of Finance, or looking at last year when the budget was announced, the Minister of Finance made it clear tough decisions needed to be made. Larry Hawaii stated that the revenue stream was challenged, and you've highlighted that point. Have these tough decisions actually been made?
Some of the tough decisions have been made, but there are tougher decisions that still need to be made, and I'm just going to point to a couple. If one takes a look at the energy sector, our downstreamers, i.e. your methanols, your ammonias, they are being starved of gas because they are operating at nameplate capacity. They are not operating at nameplate capacity. They are in fact operating at around 91 to 92% of capacity. What that is doing is that is denying the country much needed tax revenue and overall revenue. It is also causing those plants to operate at suboptimal capacity, and their firms are being denied revenue. That's something that we need to fix. The role of NGC, the role of Petrotrin, how do we catalyze Petrotrin and move Petrotrin to the kind of model that an eco-petrol is and that a Petrobras is, where they've been able to transform those economies. That's a couple on the energy side. He's made a good decision around the SPT, the supplemental tax regime, by harmonizing it, but we also have to do a couple other things, which is to be bold in terms of moving our energy sector overseas into provinces like Africa, into provinces Far East Asia, etc., because the old model, the current model in which we operate with NGC is not the appropriate model. It was relevant pre-shale gas, it was relevant in the 90s, it's not relevant today.
Not relevant now. Public sector, private sector partnerships was seen as a great solution to take the economy forward, to bring private sector principles into public sector and state center entities. Has this scheme materialized at all?
It's still early days in the public-private sector partnership. There are opportunities in the maritime space, and there are various other areas in which the public-private sector partnership can move forward. You asked me the question about tough decisions. Some tough decisions need to be made. One, should we have a state sector as large as it currently is? Should we divest some of the state enterprises? Two, in cases where state companies aren't performing, how are we going to bring them to book? A case in point is Caribbean Airlines. You've run up a debt of over $700 million. You have unaudited accounts for 11 and 12. What does the government do around boards in which there are unaudited accounts for 2010, unaudited accounts for 2011, and unaudited accounts for 2012? How do we hold directors responsible? How do we put in place the appropriate legislation that forces state enterprises whose assets are $4, $5, and $6 billion to operate in the same way that a publicly listed company operates?
Public sector, private sector, looking at the principles that govern the various entities. We're going to take a very short break. When we come back, we're going to wrap the interview up with Jerry Brooks, one of the leading business minds in the Caribbean. His thoughts on where we are mid-year. Stay with us. Welcome back, Trinidad and Tobago. I'm Hema Ramsoon. Thanks for staying with us. A mid-year economic review. Don't forget, in a little while, we enter the political stir on the morning brew. Some of the latest political controversies. Talking about political controversies, Mr. Brooks, when we went before the break, you spoke of state sector entities and state sector enterprises. And I have to ask you, the duty between a board of directors and its stakeholders and its shareholders is considered sacred. You sit on one of the largest boards of one of the largest conglomerates in the Caribbean. Do you think the relationship between state boards and its stakeholders and corporations sold in the public sector, is it sacrilegious? If we describe it as sacred in the private sector, would you say it's sacrilegious in the public sector?
It is sacrilegious. It should be sacrilegious, Hema, but there are a couple of things that I think that need to happen with state boards and directors. One is the pool from which directors are being drawn needs to be enlarged, and persons who are inclined to serve must come forward. I think that when one takes a look at the integrity legislation, it acts as a bar to good people coming forward. And unfortunately, the integrity legislation is not catching anyone, but it's preventing good people from coming forward. That's one. Secondly, I think that state companies need to be under responsibility to report their accounts in the same way that a publicly listed companies required to do it within 15 months of year end. That will force actual accounting and reporting. The third thing that I think that needs to happen is that the Auditor General's Department needs to be improved in terms of capacity to ensure that an independent agency can go into state enterprises, can audit those accounts, and can report back to the nation. There also needs to be quarterly and half-yearly reporting, certainly half-yearly mandatory reporting in the case of state companies, so that one can catch problems early and recognize good performance when good performance has occurred.
Now, when we opened this interview, we spoke about diversification. We're going to share with our viewers yet another clip from our newscast. Then we're going to talk about diversification. Is it an elusive dream? And where is growth happening? Well, that was just footage of what's happening at the nation's groceries, and talking about that, we're looking at VAT. But, Mr. Brooks, looking at diversification, is it an elusive dream, and where is growth taking place?
Diversification, Hema, is not an elusive dream, it's an imperative. It's an imperative for us to be able to drive economic transformation, and it's an imperative for us to be able to drive sustainable growth. Where we're seeing growth is in a couple big sectors. One, in the manufacturing and construction sector, and certainly in the construction sector, one is seeing growth. Remember, the construction sector is responsible for about 8% of our GDP, and it's the largest employer per MMBTU of gas, and is a significant employer in the East-West corridor and many of the main arteries in Trinidad and Tobago. So you've seen a lot of building construction taking place. The Max, for example, in San Fernando, have put up a new, in the process of putting up a new center. You are seeing Ansimakal with our clay tile plant, which is $450 million. You're seeing Neil and Massey with Mitsubishi with a US $850 million plant. You're seeing various other, RGM is also putting up property, and you're seeing various other 8- and 9-story properties in Port of Spain. So there definitely is construction activity. You're also seeing some growth in the agricultural sector, according to the minister and according to the central bank report. But again, we need to be careful, because these are nascent green shoots of growth that need to be preserved to ensure that one has sustainable growth. And there are a couple of issues that we need to face here. One, there's a labor shortage. And we need to rethink CPEP, and we need to rethink URP. There's a skills development imperative. How do we ensure that EETs, METs, which are mechanical, electrical technicians, that we improve those skills in the areas of underwriting and financial services, claims handling and financial services, because those things are actually going to be the engines that power growth.
Mr. Brooks, my final question to you this morning as we wrap this interview. This government has faced its brunt of challenges, from Reshmi Ramnarayan to Section 34 to the latest Emailgate scandal that's being dubbed in the media. Are you concerned about the political climate, the stability of this country?
I am not concerned about political instability. What I am concerned about is political maturity. I'm concerned about diplomacy, values, tact, and a mature collaboration and a mature cooperation where opposition and government work together to ensure the long-term security of the country and to ensure sustainable growth. Many initiatives in diversification and in economic transformation will transcend the life of one government. And therefore, it's vitally important that there is a maturity that recognizes where good programs have been put in place, those programs are going to be continued into the next dispensation. So the issue for me really is around mature collaboration, it's around dialogue, it's around embracing the unions in a meaningful tripartite discussion, it's around civil society and embracing them in an appropriate discussion. So I'm less concerned about political instability. We do not have that kind of history. It's really more around political maturity, focus, the absence of patronage, and really driving the country forward seriously and setting the right example and tune.
Patronage is something that paints the public sector. Do you think that that's a sort of reality that we're facing, or is it just a perception not grounded in fact?
To both the perception and the reality are equally dangerous. And for us to address that, we have to do things like campaign finance reform. We have to ensure that we have integrity legislation that really works. We have to have accountability. Where Caribbean Airlines runs up a debt of $700 million, who is accountable? What's the change process that's being put in place? Should there be a prosecution? How could we lose $200 billion in cargo revenue? So there have to be consequences. There have to be consequences in the case of CLECO. We've had this expensive commission of inquiry. Nothing has come of it. So that we have to demonstrate consequences, but we also have to have campaign finance reform so that one sees and understands how the money is going, and then you also have to have a strong audit process and a strong accountability process. Perhaps the greatest danger of Parliament today is that it has descended in the kind of arena of old talk, bakalang, move-along, and foolishness, which does not inspire a generation of young people. It really has to be values-driven, a kind of maturity, a kind of focus, a kind of professionalism, so that young people in looking at this can say, yes, we can aspire to this, and yes, we are committed to Trinidad and Tobago, because at the end of the day, our progress is our collective responsibility.
Our progress is our collective responsibility. The closing comments there of Jerry Brooks. We're going to take a very short break. When we come back, the latest political controversy. We're talking about the TOP, but we're also talking about the PNM next. Email gate, that's what's being called. Do you trust the police to investigate this matter? Justin Phelps joins us on set. Stay with us.